welcome back to the show. My next guest is a teacher, a geophysicist, and an author, but that is really only the tip of the iceberg, quite literally. He has just released his new book called Chill Out, an Antarctic Odyssey. He's on the line now. Please welcome Brian Gaull. Hello, Brian. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks, Darren. It's great to be there, mate.
Now, your work as a geophysicist has taken you around the country and overseas, but you are one of only a handful of people to visit the seventh and vastly uncharted continent of Antarctica. That must have been an honour.
It was indeed. It was a great privilege to be down there. I was told by my colleagues a little bit about it, so that sort of inspired me as well to go down and check it all out.
Now, I say visit, but you were there for well over a year. Now, how would you describe such an experience?
It was good and bad. It was extremely good and extremely bad at times. Mainly the isolation was the issue, especially in the days of 1979, 80 and 81. I was away during that particular interval, and it was particularly difficult just to get your handle or your head around that and be able to sort of be your own support, and you didn't have anyone else there except your colleagues, if you like.
I like how your book is very descriptive and your words really create amazing images of the beauty and the majestic wonderland of the southern continent. Was it hard to convey what you were seeing into words alone?
Indeed, very much. As a consequence, my book has some photographs, albeit black and white, but they do give some idea of what I'm saying and how it moves you, the whole environment. Being out in the wild, on your own, in this very faraway land was just extremely, what would you call it, Darren? It would be more of a enlightening experience, I suppose you would call it.
Very spiritual as well. A sense of isolation would really hone home as to what's really important in life.
It plays on your mind, mate. Yes, it does. And you think about, I had two boys, young boys at the time, and yes, and it was very difficult to leave them. And so the whole emotional journey is a part of the whole thing, you know. That's why I've called it an Odyssey, because it's many, many journeys within the one journey, because you learn about yourself, you know what I mean? You really do learn about yourself and the extreme environment down there and what it's like and how you can cope with it. Yeah. Would you be able to cope? And all this sort of thing was going through your mind.
I say sightseeing and fun, but there were many times when the weather just turned nasty, even life-threatening, with blizzards lasting for days, even weeks on end. I mean, tell us about that.
Well, that was the most difficult, I think. You weren't sure if you were going to make it through to the other end, especially the first blizzard at Mount Biscoe near Mount King in Enderby Land. It was just amazing to be there with one other guy in a small little tiny tent. You couldn't swing a cat in there, and the whole tent was coming down on me because the wind was so strong that the side of the tent was bellying, if I can use it that word, bellying in on top of me, and I couldn't move. I was just destined to remain there for days at a time. I had to get up and crawl out of my bag to go to the toilet outside, but I'm saying that this is a very, very difficult situation.
And there are blizz lines set between the buildings at Mawson to help pull your way to the next location, right?
Mate, you've read the book very well.
I have.
Oh, this is great, Darren. I really appreciate your very positive comments, and it was my first book, and I'm really, really glad that I've explained it well, because I felt obliged to explain it to the taxpayer who financed it way back then. Obviously, the people will be mostly retired like me now, but actually the government paid for everything and gave me a salary as well. And so I really felt so honoured and privileged, like you said, about this opportunity. It comes up once in a lifetime, and when it came, I just grabbed it, mate.
Now, the term whiteout comes up a lot in the book. For our listeners, could you explain what that is?
Oh, thank you. Yes, whiteout is probably one of the most eerie things you can go through. When we were coming down in the helicopter in the field, you can't see where the ground is, if you like, because the ground is white, and you're actually coming in through a white cloud, condensation, and as a consequence, he's not sure how to land the aircraft. One of the choppers crashed because of this whiteout experience. I wasn't on board, thank God, because it was just amazing. They have to fly, and sometimes when you fly, you don't know what's going to be at the other end when you get there. So this is the problem. And even when you're on the ground, finding your way through, unless you've got a blizz line, as you said, or a blizzard line, you don't know where you are. You don't know which way is up, down, because it all looks the same. There's no shadows. There's nothing to guide you where up and down is. So, and I remember just crawling along the ground and wondering where the bliss line is because I fell over and I didn't know what to do. So there's all these problems.
It's like trying to find the fridge at night, but in your case, you're in the fridge.
Yeah, well said, well said.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I would say even in the freezer, because it certainly got down to temperatures that were below freezing. In fact, I was going to conduct a slide night for my friends, a slide night of all things. Now, of course, it's a PowerPoint show, and I was going to hire a freezer for it, but I never got around to doing that,
Just to
mate.
match-
But that's what it's like, yeah.
Match the conditions, I can understand that. That makes sense. And does that really test the human senses as well? Because obviously you're blistering cold, your fingers are numb, and you got to rely on the strength just to sort of get you to another building. That's got to really be a testing experience
Yes.
for anybody.
Indeed it is.
Yeah.
And when you're going from building to building, you know that comfort will come soon. But when you've got to be out in the field, away from Mawson, away in the extreme isolated parts, it's just you against the elements. And my fingers, I used to wear gloves, of course, and more than one pair at once. We had mitts. We had two lots of mitts, and then we had the trail mitts to go on top. But when I was out doing my geophysical work, I had to measure the magnetic field, and to do that in those days, you had to take your gloves off, essentially, to get the dexterity on the instrument. So what happened was I used to have to run into the caravan after I finished my measurements and just put them by the heater. And as I did, I realised that wasn't a good idea, because it really, the most painful thing, it starts to burn your fingers, and you haven't got enough blood there, and so it just all clogs up. And it is a difficult one, and a little bit of frostbite occurred at that time.
A sudden change in temperature, it's like freezing glass and then suddenly heating it up. It just be hard to cope with that.
Exactly. That's what frostbite really means. It means your blood is thinning out. It's getting to the point, no, the opposite. It's clogging up, and it's there, and it just doesn't want to move, mate. It's almost icy, if you like. So, yeah, it is a problem. But somehow or other, Mother Nature's designed us to want to keep going, and I don't feel as though I've done anything special, but it was mainly that because I know that I've had an opportunity that a lot of people don't have, I think that I really was compelled to write the book to explain what it's like as a normal geophysicist or a normal expeditioner, and explaining what it's like to live there with these other very, very incredible, intrepid guys for a whole year or more. So, yeah, that was worth writing about, mate. It really was.
And also shows that Mother Nature is really in charge. We like to think we're the dominant species on the planet, but Mother Nature just slaps us across the face, doesn't it?
It does indeed, Darren.
And you refer to her as she as well. I like that.
Yeah. What was that, sorry?
You refer to her, Mother Nature, as she. I'm doing the quotes right now.
Yes, indeed. You picked that up as well. It's out of respect, because unless you've got respect for nature, and you really will struggle, you're not in charge at all, and you've mentioned that, and thank you for that. And you certainly become very humble, and you realise the scale of the whole continent, and you are just a little tiny flea in this whole continent, mate. And she can do what she likes with you, that magic wand, if you like. It just comes down and you feel powerless.
And the people around you, your support network, your fellow workers, they become your close friends, even your second family, don't they?
Indeed. That's very true. The rapport is just beyond any explanation, because you don't know these guys till you go down there, and all of a sudden you've got all these strangers running around, and after a few weeks and months, you start to realise that you're depending on them for your life. You're going outside or anything like that, then they'll keep an eye out for you. So you really are very compelled, and you realise this. No one tells you this, but you realise that they are your family. Yes, you've got to look after each other, mate.
And you develop a certain camaraderie, become best mates, life friends, I would imagine.
Indeed, we are. In fact, I've been lucky to actually be the host at a reunion that I organised in Bunbury in Western Australia. I've just organised, and they've all gone back now, but they all came over from Eastern Australia, Northern Australia, and from all over the place, from Perth, of course, and we had a whole bunch of those same guys, and we're still just as exuberant, as just so affectionate towards each other. And as you get older, it seems to be increasing the affection.
It's probably been like a long time since you've seen each other, but when you caught up again, was it like you never left?
Exactly. Thank you for that. That was a wonderful thing. Yeah, that's a revelation, that was. And my wife came to my first reunion when we had this way back, and I hadn't seen the guys for 20 years at stage anyway, and I didn't get along to some of the earlier ones, and there weren't very many, but I went to Hobart and met them, and it was 20 years or something like that, and it was just amazing how she could not believe the camaraderie was still there, and we just grabbed each other, and it was just amazing to relive it all.
I also read you got up to a lot of pranks and played some jokes on each other. Now, I can't air most of them, but give us like a PG example of the kind of of stuff you got up to?
Oh, yeah, I can just tell you one quick one.
Yep.
One of my friends who was living next door in the donga next door to me, there was very little privacy, of course, and very, very small dongas they were, and as dongas are. And when he was out in the field one day with the husky dog, another chap and myself called Raincoat, we got into Jumbo's room. His name was Jumbo.
Yeah, that's your nickname for him?
Yeah. He was a very big guy, and but very placid, thank heavens, because otherwise I wouldn't have survived. But we got a big weather balloon, one of those meteorological balloons, and we got a compressor, and we blew it up to inordinate size. It was bigger than the donga, and so it eventually exploded, and it left the donga in bits of glass lying around when his girlfriend's photograph came off the wall and smashed, and everything like that. And when he got home, it was late at night, and I was in bed, and I could hear him stomping down the corridor, and I was terrified. And when he went in to walk into the room, because it was only a curtain, not a door, he went boing, hit the balloon and back out again, because it filled the whole donga.
It's like high school boys playing pranks, but it was all in good fun, wasn't it?
It was all in good fun, yeah. Don't worry, they got me back several times, these guys. I mean, there was all sorts of buckets and things going through the door into my science office. There was a bucket of ice falling on top of me and whatever. It was all just fun. That's what kept you alive, the humour. You know what I mean?
It's a bit of fun, just to keep your mind sane.
That's it. It keeps you sane, mate. It does.
There's a drawing in the book. Now, I believe you know which one I'm talking about. It's of you. It's like a cartoon animation.
Yes.
It's of you, let's say, in your birthday suit. When I saw that, I got to say, first of all, it's a little unusual to see. Secondly, it gives a whole new meaning to the term South Pole.
Oh, I like that.
Yep.
It's a very good play on words.
Of course.
It was. And I had a really nice time out in the field, and we were there for months at a time, and getting back from Mount King was 600 kilometres, so it took many, many weeks to get back, and having been out in the field for weeks as well, so it took months altogether. And when you get into a blizzard, you can't do anything, you've got to just sort of lie and hope that your caravan doesn't roll over. And so this guy started to do some drawings, and he did some incredible drawings, and some of them I could put in, but some of them I couldn't, so I had to do a little bit of vetting, if you like. And
edited, a bit of a cut and paste.
Cut and paste, that's the one, but there were a couple that slipped through, and I think you know the ones I mean.
I'm sure they are framed on your wall. Yeah, you look at them every day and you're like, yep, I can't show that to anybody else.
Yeah. I tell you what I did get though. Oh mate, it meant so much to me. At the reunion, we had a couple of speeches, and because I organised the thing, the boys decided to chip in and present me with a wonderful photograph, framed photograph with glass on the front of a coloured picture of all of the expeditioners taken on the sea ice in front of Mawson, and it was all our faces were there in our ventiles, but we all wore beards and everything like that. And I can tell you what, a bigger bunch of rogues you wouldn't want to meet.
It sounds like a treasured heirloom you would keep forever.
Absolutely.
Also, you liken the experience to space exploration as far as the isolation, which means you have to be mentally strong as well as physically, don't you?
Yes, you do. I think that's probably more important than physical strength. I think that mental strength, it's a bit like Nelson Mandela going to jail for 25 years. Yeah, having the mental prowess to survive, and it's a little bit like that. I don't think it's anything as bad as that, of course, because at least we could walk outside if we really, really wanted to, as long as you were careful with where you went and so on. But yeah, you know that you can't get home. You just know that.
Yes,
and so there is an incarceration, if you like, aspect to it, and you're there for 16 months or 17 months, and you're wondering how it's all going to end. And I got asked to do some more work after the 12 months, and so I went to Davis Base, and so I had to continue, and my family was wondering what had happened to me. We only spoke very rarely on the phone, and so, yeah, it was a pretty tough time, mate. Mental health was very critical.
And this is before the time of Facebook and the internet, rare phone calls, and when the communications were open, available to do it.
Yes, that's right. Fax machines were just coming in then, so there was a bit of faxing going on with a photograph or two going backwards and forwards from the Antarctic to Australian Antarctic Centre in Melbourne, and also in Adelaide, because it did change from Melbourne to Adelaide in that year of 1979 to 80. But yeah, mate, there was just no technology. One guy He had a laptop or the equivalent thereof, I think, but it was very, very primitive, very, very lacking in any sort of prowess, in any sort of memory. So it was ordinary, but we managed. Everything was done with analog instruments and this sort of thing. It's not like today, which makes it easier in some ways, but it's taken away a lot of that romance, if you like, when we really did have it more difficult, if you like.
And more sort of hands-on, you sort of understand the technology and what you're doing more, as opposed to, let the computer take care of it.
That's it. Yeah. Well, nowadays, that's what happens.
Yeah,
down there, the guys don't even go down. They sit in Canberra all year. They sometimes go down because it's all telemetered through satellite back to Canberra, so they don't need to send someone down, except in the summertime they have to go down just to do some observations to tie it all in. It's called baseline. But at the end of the day, no, it's all changed, mate. And I think for the worse in that sense. If you like adventure, you don't get that adventure anymore.
I'm glad you said adventure, because all kids dream of being explorers and travellers. I know my father's favourite movie is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm pretty sure Jules Verne enticed him with a sense of adventure and travel. Do you have anyone who inspired you to want to see different parts of the world?
Yeah, funny of that, because it was when I was 10 years old, I saw a film that was a black and white or 16mm in the school that I attended at Williams Primary School in Western Australia, and it turns out that I saw a documentary of the guys that went to Heard Island, just to the southwest, very far southwest of Fremantle in Western Australia, and it's in the sub-Antarctic, and it was very cold, and I saw all these wonderful animals that were down there, and these scientists were going around measuring things, and I just thought, I want to be in that. So at 10 years of age, I was really, really wanting to do it then. So that inspired me very much, Darren.
And I believe your grandfather was a prospector in the 1800s, is that correct?
That's correct, my friend, yes. He actually inspired me too, but I never actually got to meet him, unfortunately, but just the sort of thing, I imagine what he was going through, because 50 years later I spent my first formative years in Kalgoorlie and Southern Cross and so on. I've been to all the places that he went to now, but of course I was lucky compared to him, because we had far more ability to drive along roads then, instead of pushing wheelbarrows along the track.
Of course. And it sounds like it's a genetic trait to want to pass that sense of adventure to the next generation.
Oh yes, very much so. It just seems to work like that. The genes really, really kick in there, and I'm really excited about it, because my grandson now looks like he's going to be one of those sort of people who will take on the world. Not that I feel any different from anyone else, because one of my main themes in the book is that scientists aren't any different to anyone else.
Absolutely.
And I think I've showed that very, very convincingly, because I've got my weaknesses as well as my strengths, just like anyone. And I struggled at times with the cold, as you know, Darren, if you've read that part, when I was at Mount King. And in fact, I was on the mountain not far from there, but it was just amazingly cold, and I really felt debilitated, totally debilitated. I wasn't able to do anything, and I felt very sorry for myself.
The book does cover a very human story, as you extensively talk about, missing your family, especially your two sons who were quite young at the time. That must have been difficult, separation and isolation.
Oh, mate, it was. And if I was in a time warp, I might be able to go back and do that, but I probably wouldn't go, because it did affect them, and they didn't have a very good year when I was away. And I do feel responsible, and I really believed them at the time. I did ask them, was it okay if Daddy went down to the Antarctic? I showed them where it was, and they were old enough to understand a little bit, but obviously they didn't understand the full ramifications of what it was like for more than 12 months. Kids don't really have a big concept of time, I suspect. Even today, I find that it did affect them a bit, and it comes up in convo. We've still got our rapport, we've got our relationship, don't get me wrong, we love each other very dearly, but I'm sorry that they suffered under the circumstances without a father for so long, and I tried to use that information to help people today where dad or mum isn't living with them at the time for a long period, like the fly-in, fly-out people, Darren. There's a lot of people are doing the fly-in, fly-out, and they're away for not necessarily months, but certainly for many weeks at a time away from their families, and it is difficult.
I was also imagining what it'd be like for Douglas Mawson, because they're doing amazing things, but even they're separated from their family, and that isolation would be harmful or hurtful for any human.
Indeed, and I think that if you go back to 1980, say, so that's 35 years ago basically, when I was down there, and then you've got to go back 70 or so years, but that's still twice as long as it was for me from today back there to 1980. So going back to Mawson's time, the technology was really quite primitive, even more so when they were there, and so it was far more scary. We knew a lot more what we were doing. We had all tested equipment and everything, and so we were in a much better position. So they were the intrepid heroes, they really were.
And he rightfully deserves to be on the old Australian $100 bill.
Indeed, that's why he's there,
Yep.
and quite proudly, and he should be there too, by jingoes. He was my hero, and a lot of other guys' hero, and ladies too, of course. But it's worth reading about all these things, because let's face it, we're so busy with our lives here in Australia, but when you're down there, you haven't got all those distractions. And if I could speak to your listeners and say to them, if I was going to give any advice, is go away on your own or with very few people, your immediate family perhaps, into a tent somewhere. Just go and camp and just be as quiet as you can and get rid of all distractions, including computers and computer games, and just see what it's like and be there with nature, and you can still reach this same tranquility that I had down there. It's very, very special. It's a spiritual thing, like you said.
You would miss modern conveniences, but it will make you appreciate what is really important in life.
That's right, and I think that's when you realise what is important, and all these material things and everything else don't mean a thing. It's the emotions, it's the family, it's the love, if you like, that really makes the difference in life, and possessions are only there to help us to enjoy our life. It's not the main reason to have life.
And you missed women as well, because for the longest time women weren't allowed in Antarctica, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And in fact, the year that I left, 1981, was the year when the First Lady came to Windsor down there, Louise Halliday. She was a doctor down in Davis, and I met her, and every Monday morning I would rock up to the surgery where she was, and she'd open the door at 8 o'clock and say, "Brian, it's not you again, is it?" And she was saying, "I know there's nothing wrong with you." I said, no, but I'm just missing women.
You're missing women.
Yeah. And so she'd be kind enough to sit me down if there was no emergency and just talk to me for 10 minutes while I listened to her beautiful voice.
That would have been comforting as well. That would have helped you through.
It was.
Yep.
It was a very nice group, and I welcomed Louise. Some people didn't really see it the same way as myself, but I didn't see it as a threat for women to come down and share that environment, because it's not just for men, it's a place for everyone, and it's a place for animals, it's a place for the whole environment, it's a place where we haven't destroyed yet,
So you're a pioneer for equal rights then, is that correct?
Pretty much. I think that there's differences between men and women, and I say vive la différence. Well, I can't even say that because I don't know French, but at the end of the day, all I'm saying to you is everyone's got an equal right to share and have happiness.
And you mentioned animals, which is a big part of Antarctica. You see animals in the wilderness and the wild that you may not see anywhere else. The huskies especially, they became part of the family as well.
Indeed. They were wonderful, those things. They really were, and I was so disappointed when 14 years after I left, they were banned from down in the Australian bases because the Green Lobby misconstrued what they were there for, and they didn't really have an impact on the environment at all. They thought that they were going to be eating too many wildlife, that we didn't have them running around madly hunting. They were well constrained, and they loved being with the humans and working hard in a beautiful pack, and we had them on a beautiful harness, and off we went on the ski, and we just really, really enjoyed it. It was fantastic.
And it shows there's a level of communication with animals. I mean, we don't really speak the same language, but there is a sense of camaraderie with animals.
Indeed. Interesting thing about was that I didn't know that the ones we had were half wolf. They were semi-wild animals, but they never liked other dogs because they were a threat. Anyone that was outside of their bloodline, but they loved all human beings, they really did. And the only time they were a problem was if they had a scrap or a fight between themselves, then you had to try and separate them because they were very strong. And there's all these clenching jaws, and so we had to be careful with where those snapping jaws were going. And one time I got into a jaw, but I was okay. You know what I mean? It was just a beautiful thing. You knew that it was just by accident that my hand was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Of course. I mean, my pets have scratched me, and it's a bit of a temper, a bit of a tantrum, but they love you and you move on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I feel sorry for the guys that go down now and they haven't got that recreational activity of going out on the sledges with the huskies, and we usually had 9 huskies all configured in a herringbone bone type thing, all joined up with a trace, and they would pull their hearts out for you, over the sea ice especially, because the sea ice is a lot flatter than going inland where you've got blue ice or fresh ice, and it's going up the mountain or up the glacier, so it's a lot harder for them to pull you up that hill. So you've got to do a lot more running.
So you're running alongside the sled just to keep up, and they're leaving you in their dust, or ice, so to speak.
Pretty much. They didn't get used as much during winter because there wasn't enough light. But as it turns out, going uphill in the springtime, they weren't as fit, and we weren't that fit either by then. But we used to train ourselves and run inside a big shed that was being built at the time, and we used to train ourselves to keep reasonably fit. So we were pretty good. We were young enough to keep on putting one foot after the other.
You mentioned animal encounters like penguins, and I'm sure you saw many more in their natural habitat, and it's really amazing how they're specifically designed to survive even the harshest of conditions.
They do. They are a wonderful animal, and because they haven't been hunted down there, the penguins in particular, and even the seals, they haven't been used by man, and so they are very friendly, and you can get pretty damn close to them and walk up to them. The only time you have trouble is the Adelie penguins. They're small ones. They used to come and, if you went too close where they were nesting, and they might come and have a bit of a snap, but they didn't really mean it anyway. But it was so beautiful just to share their lives and just sit there and watch them. And even the birds flying overhead, the petrels and the skuas, and the people who love nature would just love being in Antarctica. It's a natural phenomenon. Everywhere you look is nature at its best, and pristine too.
Sounds absolutely beautiful. And you also mentioned about the lack of light sometimes. I mean, the day-night cycle down in Antarctica is most unusual. You'd have the sun that was up for a whole week and then you wouldn't see it for a while. Does that take getting used to? Did you miss the sun and the moon, I guess?
Yes, indeed. I think it was very true. We are very, very cyclical, where circadian is the word. It's a term which they use for the circadian rhythm, and you've got your sun and you've got your moon and the gravity and the light that comes with everything. And that's why people get really thrown about when they start trying to change nature and they try to work through the night and they sleep during the day. It's much harder to do that than do the other thing, of course, which is what we're designed for. So it did take time. The Americans thought that was a particular condition called red eye, I think we used to call it, and they reckon that it really throws you out totally when you've got, let's say, a month of where you can't really see outside without some sort of artificial help with a torch or whatever. And then in the middle of the summer, of course, you've got the opposite. You've got 24 hours of daylight, which can still be a problem trying to sleep because you still need to sleep.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I do want to talk science. One of the main reasons you were down there was to take seismic and magnetic readings. What can we learn from this information, and why is it necessary to measure it from down there? Couldn't we measure the same thing from other parts of the world?
Yes, that's right. That was the question that was posed to me on the way down. Well, as it turns out, the magnetic field is dynamic and it's moving all the time. In other words, there is a magneto in the central Earth. You mentioned Jules Verne. How many?
20,000 leagues.
20,000 leagues under the sea. Well, it's sort of like under that sort of distance. Down there, you've got this dynamo and it's generating the magnetic field because of all this iron. It's because of the heat and everything. The convection current of this magma is moving around, and so it's got this magnetic field associated. Whenever you have electric charge moving along a wire or whatever, then you get a magnetic field generated, and it's an electromagnetic effect, and so you've got this magnetic field which is moving and moving because the magma is moving, and so you've got this all sorts of movement that's going on, and plus you've got these cosmic rays and everything coming from outer space and sort of generating lots of other field or current by virtue of the fact they collide with the atmosphere, and then you get the auroras happening.
Beautiful aurora, yes.
Yeah, the colours that are generated from the knocking of the electrons out of orbit in the oxygen molecules and the nitrogen molecules. They all have different colours in the sky, especially in the winter when there's no extraneous light, and it's just beautiful. It really is, and it moves around, and so does the magnetic field with it.
So the Earth's magnetic field is strongest at the poles.
Very much so, and it's pretty much vertical is the magnetic pole, is that the magnetic field line is actually heading straight vertically underneath you, and that's when you know you're at the magnetic south pole or the magnetic north pole. The field is vertical, going in or coming out. but you can't see it, of course, and that's why you need all these instruments that are sensitive to magnet or the magnetic field, and we used to use just magnets essentially, but today there's all sorts of other ways of digitally measuring that field, the strength of the field and the direction of the field.
I have read about this before, and in the past the poles have reverse polarity. We're due for another switch. So what's going to happen in the future, when it does happen, when the poles reverse again?
Yeah, that's right. That's what will happen. It's just a matter of time. And the magnetic poles are moving at the rate of something like, I think it's 50 kilometres every century or something like that. And it doesn't sound much, but it is moving. And at the moment, the south magnetic pole is well out to sea. It's not underneath the Antarctic continent. It's south of New Zealand and it's heading north. So if it keeps heading north, then of course a flip from where the South Pole will end up in the northern hemisphere, and the North Pole, where it is at the moment, will end up in the south. It doesn't mean to say the Earth's going to move, but this actual magnetic field reversal has happened in the past, because when rocks have been solidifying and coming out of liquid into a volcano, then they've left a residual field. As it turns into a solid rock, if it's got magnetic properties, that solid rock will leave behind a very, very interesting field in its own right. It'll perturbate. You can actually find the field. It's like finding a natural magnet, you know what I mean? It's a natural magnet on the ground. So we know from the signals that have been found from all these little rocks at different ages, we know that the magnetic field, it changes from one to the other and swaps over many, many times.
And does that mean one day our compasses will point south instead of north when the poles do switch?
Correct. That's exactly what happens, yes.
Wow.
But I don't think there's any big deal about it. I mean, it's not as though we can feel the magnetic field or have an impact on us, but it will eventually, I believe it will happen, but it won't be in my lifetime, sir.
Well, between field studies and teaching and writing, which do you find the most rewarding?
I like all of them, actually, because I'm retired, but I do mentoring at the high school, and I used to really enjoy motivating the kids. Did you ever see the movie called Dead Poets Society?
Yes, I did. Carpe Diem.
Absolutely, it's beautiful. Robin Williams, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of teacher I tried to be. I mean, not that Robin Williams was around at the time, because I was much older than Robin Williams, and unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but I used to stand on the desks instead of standing on the floor. I stand on the desk just to get the kids' attention, you know what I mean? And that's why I still go up to the high school and volunteer my time to help any kids that are struggling a little bit. But there's a lot of other people doing that. There's no big deal. But I used to enjoy that. But I think that the field work was my favourite. But having said that, it's always a good feeling, because I used to work in seismology as well. It's always a good feeling to know that you've found something really special. And in Antarctica, I was one of the first to acknowledge the seismic signals that were generated when a huge glacier, a catastrophic iceberg carving, if you like, at the end of the glacier, crashed down into the seabed many hundreds of metres below and generated all these seismic signals. So it's very exciting to be all three of those things.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Brian, because I would love to know what you think about global warming. Politicians say it's not happening, but there is data to support it. So what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, it's very clear, my thoughts, and it's very clear scientific data. I mean, there's lots of people who've got an axe to grind or a barrow to push. They don't want to believe in climate change because it means that people have to change their ways of life, and they won't be able to burn so much coal. They won't be able to drive their car as far, or if they do, it'll cost them a lot more. So there's a lot of profit to be made out of oil and coal. So that's why newspapers that are owned by all these companies and corporations don't want the truth to be known. So don't you worry about the science is already in. Yep. It's very, very much so, Darren. Climate change is taking place, and there's a lot of evidence of it today.
And money's always a factor. If something's going to cost too much to change, it just won't happen.
That's exactly what Mr. Abbott would have us believe, especially at the beginning of his term. Now he's saying that he's acknowledging that there is such a thing as climate change, but he's very, very low-key and was found embarrassed with Obama's recent visit when he was saying about the barrier reef is getting stirred up, and it certainly is, and it's getting bleached. And so what they were saying was incorrect, and Mr. Obama was right.
And there is a political aspect to Antarctica because Australia lays claim to approximately 40% of the continent. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, very interesting. It's 1.7 times bigger than Australia, so we're actually claiming 40% of that. So it's very close to almost the size of Australia, what we're claiming down there.
I'm sure part of it is because nobody else wants it, perhaps, but it is encouraging to know that Australia has contributed a lot to the understanding of Antarctica.
Absolutely, and I think that, if anything, that's the main thing I want to get across to your listeners, because it's very important to know that it's going on today as it is all the way through, pretty much all the way through last century, and it's going to be going on incessantly unless the budget is cut again, which I hope they will never cut the scientific budget, because otherwise we'll be left behind the rest of the world and we'll be this laughing stock. But at the end of the day, Darren, it's going to continue, and everyone should be aware, and that's why I wrote the book, to let them know what is being studied, who is studying it, why we're studying it, and also to explain what we do with the information.
And there's international cooperation in regards to Antarctica to help protect it, and the treaty was signed as well.
Yes, indeed. I've written a poem because it makes you think about all these things you don't get time for in Australia. There's international cooperation. It's called the reincarnation of peace, and it really is true down there. It's the only place on Earth where no wars have occurred, where very little conflict of any sort. All there is cooperation. Do you know why? Because mankind struggles to survive in this environment, and whenever there's struggling going on like that, then unless we cooperate with each other, then there's not much chance of survival. So yes, I've seen the Russians down there doing incredible things. We're all human, and we've all got the same requirements, a bit of oxygen, a bit of food, and a little bit of time off work to enjoy ourselves. And so they're no different to anyone else. And I found that they were wonderful, and it reinforced my original thought that we're all the same, mate.
And it's really encouraging to know that despite the fact that this took place during the Cold War, we can essentially put aside our differences, work together, and we can accomplish amazing things.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. If we can get rid of the politicians, then we'll be in much better.
If there was a vote on that one, I'm sure it'd be unanimous.
Yeah. That's it, Darren. Yeah.
Absolutely right. I guess also what you just mentioned as well, it gives you a perspective on how valuable life is and to be grateful for what we have.
Oh, very much. Yeah. I think that we all should, and because our trajectory at the moment, our environmental footprint is just so damaging to the cities especially, and even in the country. We admit now that it's a pity the Murray-Darling Basin is in such a mess, and we're all a little bit too greedy. If we could just step back and look at what we have got and enjoy that, and not be too greedy, so that we can leave a pretty good place for our generations to come, I think the place would be a much better place to live. I really do. We don't need these incredible sized buildings and houses and 3 or 4 cars or 16 TVs. We just don't need them. It doesn't make you happier if you have 16 TVs.
We are a little greedy. I mean, money doesn't buy happiness, but there are people out there who certainly give it a red hot go, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They push it too hard. But I just got back from being in Cambodia, and these people have been through the mill with politicians again, Pol Pot and so on. And I tell you what, I just could not believe how happy they are, and they've got nothing. Yeah. They've got absolutely nothing. Yep. The only thing they had, the kids, to play was some marbles that we used to have when we were kids, and they used to play with the marbles, and they were very happy for us to come and show how bad we were at playing marbles. And, it was just a wonderful place to visit, and everyone should go up there and be thankful for what we've got compared to what they've got, and yet I know that they are happier than we are, and that is a funny thing to say, mate.
You're right, it certainly does give you a lot to think about. Also, the tone of the book shifts from daily activities to beautiful surroundings to potentially life-threatening dangers. I mean, at any point did you think you were close to death, or did the thought go through your head, well, that's it, I'm done?
I think mostly in the field, a little bit back in Mawson. I was lucky because not everyone gets a chance to go out into the field except on what we call jollies, and they were very close to Mawson, so you didn't really feel the same as you do when you're hundreds of kilometres from anywhere, or even 1,000 or two. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I think that being in that tent in different places in Mount King and around the Enderby Land area, every day there was a new threat. That whole summer, I felt my life was in danger, yes.
Wow, that in itself is scary to think about, and I'm a bit of a survival show nut. I watch these programs like Bear Grylls, and I disagree with him. I say, oh no, I'd do it this way, or I'd start a fire like this, and I'm saying this from the comfort of my own home in my recliner chair, so I really don't have a clue, do I?
Well, probably not, but at least you've got an interest in it and you'll pick up things. And innately, humans are very resourceful and we can survive one hell of a lot. Mother Nature, I give her credit again. Yep. She's designed us very, very well. Don't worry about that. Absolutely. Even in the extreme cold, for example. You know, your appendages, your fingers go first and so on, but you don't need fingers for life. So all the blood runs back into your heart and your lungs and things that keep you alive. And eventually when the conditions start improving again, it just all starts to work again, except occasionally you get an amputation, I suppose, but it's better that than dying, you know. So we have got some pretty good equipment when we walk around in our bodies.
And do you watch those programs with a sense of, what you're doing is wrong and I do it differently, and what would you know because I've actually been there, and are they posing?
Yeah, well, a little bit of that, but I mean, you can't blame Bear Grylls or any of those guys. Obviously, there's a fair bit of showmanship in it, but I think you can learn a lot from watching the program. I would watch it, except my wife's not very keen, that's all.
I'm glad he's teaching us, so at least it's a learning experience as well.
Yes, indeed, of course.
Yeah. And now I got to say, after reading your book, I promise never to complain about Adelaide's winter again. I promise I'll never do it.
Oh, great, Darren. Because I've been to Adelaide many times, as you know, and I've got a very fond connection with them through my wife. And it does get cold, but it's a bit like if you haven't got the right equipment, if you're out in a rainstorm and you haven't got any wet weather gear, then it's difficult. So even Adelaide can be difficult at times, and especially when the winds get up, or if you get those northerlies from the desert to the north and so on, you're still going to suffer, mate, but it is nothing in comparison. You're right, it's not life-threatening, no.
And I'll just let you know that it's a nice and sunny 32 degrees here right now, so I'm feeling fine.
I would love to be in Adelaide today because you've got the test match.
Of course, yeah. And I've got to ask you this as well. Who should play you in the movie version of your book?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that one. It's got me off guard a bit. But would you believe my OIC, can I call him that? He's the officer in charge. When I was down there, his name is Sid Kirkby, and I'll give him a plug. He's got a book out now, and they had a play written about him. He's an explorer of great repute, and he goes right back. He's quite a lot older than I am, and he was back there in the 50s. And the book, and he's got a play about it as well. It'll come to me in a minute, but the Andrew Forrest's son acted as Sid Kirkby because he was a surveyor. And you've got an interest in surveying too, haven't you?
That's right. I've actually done a whole field of study in surveying, so I've done my fair share of setting up tripods and using theodolites. So yes, I related a lot to your book as far as the science is concerned. Oh,
great. Yeah, that would make a big difference to you. That's right, Darren, and thanks for reminding me about that. And Sid Kirkby's my hero, and his book, if you look it up on Google, Sid Kirkby, as in Sydney, Kirkby, Kirkby, you'll find his book, and that one is worth looking at. It's on Amazon as well as my book, which is Chill Out, an Antarctic Odyssey by Brian Gaull. I've got to get a plug in, I'm sorry.
Of course, don't worry, I'm well ahead of you on that one.
Thank you.
I got to say, Brian, I could talk to you forever. This is so fascinating. It's an amazing, incredible journey involving adventure, science, and personal, very human stories. So Chill Out, an Antarctic Odyssey is available now in all good bookstores, and not the bad ones, right, Brian?
Yeah, very much.
Brian Gaull, thank you so much for your time. It's an absolute pleasure, and best wishes for everything.
Yeah, and same to you, Darren, and to your family that I know. And it's Christmas time, so I'd like to wish you and all your listeners a very Merry Christmas. And thank you for your interview. It was a wonderful experience.